A wealthy CEO was passing by when he saw two young boys selling their most beloved toy to help their sick mother, unaware that this moment would change all their lives forever. Pause. What if one small act of kindness could rewrite an entire family's future? This is Dark Voices, and today, we're diving into an extraordinary tale of love and hope. The crisp autumn wind swept through Central Park, spinning dry leaves beside an old bench where identical twins sat quietly, Mason and Andrew Miller. They looked alike from head to toe, down to the matching moles on their noses, huddled together for warmth in the chilly morning. A small red toy car sat between them, its edges slightly faded, but still gleaming under the sun. "Someone's going to buy this," Mason said softly, with hope, as he turned the car in his palms. "It's the best one." Andrew nodded slowly, his nerves barely hidden as he watched people walk by. His stomach growled, but he ignored it. They hadn't eaten since a small breakfast the day before. But that wasn't important. What mattered now was their mother, pale and sick at home, who needed medicine they couldn't afford. Pause. Can you imagine the courage it takes for two young boys to face such a burden? Stay with us on Dark Voices to find out how their story unfolds. "Let's try over there," Andrew suggested, pointing toward the busier part of the path where professionals hurried by. The boys approached the crowd, masking their fear with a quiet courage far beyond their years. Their bright blue eyes followed each passerby, filled with silent hope. "Excuse me, sir," Mason called out to a man in a suit. "Would you like to buy our car? It's really nice." The man walked past them as if they didn't exist. Over and over again, the same thing happened. People passed by. Some glanced with pity. Others pretended not to see. "We need to try harder," Andrew's voice trembled. "Mom needs the medicine now." On the other side of the park, a sleek black car came to a stop. James Sanders, adjusting the sleeve of his designer suit, listened to his driver list out his afternoon appointments. At 42, James was the mastermind behind Sanders Enterprises, a global tech powerhouse known for innovation and his relentless business acumen. "I'm going to walk for a bit," he told the driver. "Pick me up on the east side in 15 minutes. James walked briskly, his mind buzzing with profits, graphs, and strategy meetings. He barely noticed the world around him until a small, earnest voice pierced through his thoughts. "Sir, would you like to buy our car?" He stopped. There was something urgent, almost desperate in that voice. He turned and saw two boys, identical, anxious faces, looking up at him. One held out the red toy car like it was the most precious thing in the world. "We're selling it," the boy said. "It's fast." "The door's open, too." James stared at the car. A strange weight settled in his chest. Their faces were full of honesty. The way they held the toy. Something in him stirred, a feeling he hadn't felt in years. "How much?" he asked, almost unaware he had spoken. The boys looked at each other. "Whatever you can give," said the boy holding the car. "We just really need the money. Our mom is sick." James examined the toy. It was clearly cherished, clean despite the worn edges with tiny fingerprints faded into the plastic. Without hesitation, he pulled out his wallet and handed over a few large bills. "Here," he said. The boys' eyes widened. It was more than they had dared hope for. Mason carefully handed over the toy, hesitating for a second before letting it go. "Thank you, sir," Andrew said, his voice shaking. "This will really help our mom." James slipped the toy into his pocket as he watched the boys clutch the money and run off. He should have returned to his meetings, to his numbers, but he stood still, watching them disappear. "Follow them," he told his driver quietly. "I want to know where they live." The black car followed the boys as they walked through worn-out streets toward a crumbling apartment building in a forgotten part of the city. James stared at the toy in his hand. It felt heavier now. It had been years since something disrupted the controlled order of his world. Years since he had wanted something beyond profit and growth. James Sanders didn't believe in fate. But as he watched the twins from the car, a voice inside him whispered that this moment mattered, that it was the start of something meaningful. His luxury vehicle looked completely out of place in front of the broken-down building the boys entered. Still holding the toy, James stayed silent. "Wait for me," he told the driver, stepping out before he could stop himself. Inside, the air smelled of dampness and neglect. James climbed the narrow staircase to the fourth floor, following the faint sound of the boys' voices. He stopped in front of a door with chipped paint and knocked firmly. The door creaked open, and one of the twins peeked out, fear and confusion in his eyes. "It's the man from the park," he called to his brother. The door opened wider, revealing the two boys standing side by side, faces unsure. Inside the small room, James saw a pale woman lying on a thin mattress. "May I come in?" he asked, his voice, usually firm, now gentle. After a moment's hesitation, the boys stepped aside. The apartment was small and clearly worn by time and hardship, but it was clean. What struck James most was the absence of anything unnecessary. No decorations, no excess, just what was needed to survive. "Mom's resting," one of the twins whispered. James guessed it was Andrew, though he wasn't sure. On the thin mattress lay Emily Miller, unconscious, her breathing shallow and uneven. Though illness had thinned her face, it still bore the soft features shared by her sons, now masked by exhaustion and pain. "How long has she been like this?" James asked quietly. "For weeks," Mason replied, his voice heavy with worry. His small shoulders slumped under the weight of responsibility far beyond his age. "She's getting worse." James knelt by the mattress and gently touched Emily's arm. Her skin was hot. She had a fever. "She needs to be in a hospital," he said firmly. "We don't have any money," Andrew said, barely above a whisper. "That's why we were selling the car." James looked at the toy in his pocket. Then he looked at the boys, worn, anxious, far too young for this kind of burden. Something stirred deep within him, a feeling long buried. "I'll take care of it," he said with quiet certainty. The twins exchanged hesitant glances. "How can we pay you back?" Mason asked, still holding on to the money like it was the only thing grounding them. James' features softened. "You already have," he replied. "You sold me your car, remember? Now it's my turn." He said nothing more. Carefully, he lifted Emily in his arms. She moaned softly, barely coherent, too weak to understand. The twins quickly followed as James carried their mother down the narrow stairs and into his car. "Where are we going?" Andrew asked, never letting go of his mother's hand. "To people who can help her," James answered while already on the phone. As the car pulled away from the collapsing building, James couldn't stop wondering why he got involved. For years, his life was locked in routine, emotions walled off. He built success step by step, fortifying himself against the pain of the past. But there was something about these boys, their quiet courage, their desperate love, that cracked those walls. In the rearview mirror, James saw them, two small figures, and he realized something. His once distant, calculated life was now deeply intertwined with theirs. At the hospital, the emergency room doors swung open automatically as James carried Emily inside. The twins followed close behind, eyes wide with worry. His presence, confident and commanding, cut through the normal procedures. Doctors immediately surrounded Emily while nurses gently guided the boys to seats at the side. "Severe dehydration, possibly kidney failure," one doctor whispered while checking Emily's vitals. "How long has she been like this?" he asked. "Several weeks," James answered, eyes fixed on the flurry of medical activity. "Will she be okay?" he asked again. The doctor's face stayed unreadable. "She needs immediate treatment." "Are you a relative?" James paused before responding. "Yes," he said, surprising even himself. Test results confirmed it. Advanced kidney disease requiring urgent dialysis. James didn't hesitate. He signed every document, unlocked his insurance, and approved all procedures. It felt as if he had known this woman his entire life. Hours passed. Now James sat between the twins in a quiet hospital hallway. They leaned on him, tired but fighting sleep. They hadn't left their mother's side until asked to step out for a procedure. "Is Mom going to die?" Andrew asked softly, his voice trembling. James looked at him and saw the fear, eyes far too familiar with hardship. No, he said calmly. She's in good hands now. But what about after? Mason asked, just as worried. We can't stay at the hospital while she's getting better. The question lingered in the silence. James had been so focused on saving Emily that he hadn't thought about what came next. But the idea of sending the boys back to that cold, empty apartment felt unbearable. You'll stay with me, he said before realizing he'd already made the decision. Until your mom gets better. The twins exchanged glances, part shock, part wonder. Your house must be big, Andrew said, trying to imagine it. It is, James replied, and for the first time in a long while, he felt self-conscious about his wealth. There's plenty of room for both of you. Later, once Emily was stable and resting peacefully, a nurse arrived with forms and asked who would be caring for the boys. James didn't hesitate. His voice was steady, his commitment clear. There was no room for doubt. As they were leaving, James watched the twins lean in and kiss their mother's forehead. Their tenderness and strength in the face of pain awakened something in him he thought long gone. The ride to James's estate was quiet. The boys sat close together in the back seat, whispering occasionally, watching as the scenery changed from the busy city to the quiet suburbs, and finally down a private road lined with trees. When the car stopped in front of James's grand mansion, the twins were stunned. Despite their exhaustion, their eyes widened with awe at the sight of the large house glowing softly under the garden lights. Do you live here alone? Mason asked as he stepped out, his eyes filled with wonder. James nodded quietly. For the first time, he saw the size of his home through a child's eyes. It was impressive, yes, but it was also cold, lifeless, and disconnected. Not tonight, he said softly as he guided them through the tall front doors. The next morning, golden sunlight streamed through the tall windows. Mason and Andrew wandered carefully through the mansion, still unsure if what they were seeing was real. The house was enormous, overwhelming in its size. Chandeliers sparkled from the ceiling. Expensive paintings lined the walls. Endless hallways led to rooms they had yet to discover. Do you think there's a swimming pool? Andrew whispered with a touch of excitement. I'm sure there are 3, Mason replied, stroking the marble banister. Their guest bedroom was larger than their entire old apartment. The beds were as soft as clouds. Though they still worried about their mother, wonder and joy began to stir again, the magic of childhood rekindled by this strange new world. From the doorway of his study, James watched them with a cup of coffee in hand. He had already made several calls, ensuring Emily's treatment would continue, postponing meetings, instructing his gruff cook, Mrs. Sanchez, to buy supplies for the children. He couldn't yet explain to himself why he was doing all this. The hospital called, he said when the twins peeked into the room. Your mom's doing better. She's responding to treatment. Their identical faces lit up with relief. Can we see her today? Andrew asked, hopeful. This afternoon, James replied. Have you eaten? The boys shook their heads. James led them to the kitchen where Mrs. Sanchez was setting breakfast on the table. She raised an eyebrow at the unexpected guests, but said nothing as she served the food. Eat, James said, glancing at his phone full of unanswered calls. The boys didn't need a second invitation. They dug in as if they hadn't eaten in days. A little while later, while James was busy working, a commotion in the hallway caught his attention. You're not allowed in there, Mrs. Sanchez said firmly, her voice calm but unwavering. James opened the door and found Mason peeking into a room at the end of the hallway. A room long closed and never entered. That door is always locked, Mrs. Sanchez explained, glancing at James. I told them. It's all right, James said, though his tone was tight. He turned to the twins. The whole house is open to you, but not that room. Understood? The boys nodded, surprised by the sudden change in his voice. That afternoon, James's driver took the twins to the hospital. Emily was awake but still weak, her eyes filled with tears at the sight of her children. My boys, she whispered, embracing them with what little strength she had. I was so scared. Mr. Sanders is letting us stay at his house, Mom, Andrew reported excitedly. It's huge. Emily looked at James who stood nearby. I don't know how to thank you, she said softly. No thanks necessary, James replied, firm but kind. The doctor came in to give an update in language simple enough for the boys to understand. Your mom's kidneys aren't working properly, he explained. We're cleaning her blood while her body heals. Will she be okay? Mason asked, still gripping his mother's hand tightly. With treatment in time, yes, the doctor answered, but it won't be quick. On the way back home, the boys were silent, processing everything they had heard. Then Andrew broke the silence. Why are you helping us? James stared out the window, watching the world go by. It was a question he kept asking himself, too. For years, he had built a life deliberately disconnected from others to avoid the pain of loss. Sometimes, he finally answered, people just need help. But he knew that wasn't the whole truth. That night, James stood in front of the locked room at the end of the hallway. The key trembled slightly in his hand. Inside were pieces of a past he had tried to bury. Photos, toys, memories he hadn't looked at in years. He squeezed the key once, then let it fall back to his side. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Behind him, the house that had once been a cold monument to success now felt different, filled with sound, energy, and life. Comforting yet terrifying. A week passed, quietly, but with a sense of change. James began waking up earlier, more attuned to the sounds of laughter, footsteps, and whispers in the hallways. The once silent mansion now buzzed with energy. His staff quickly adapted. Mrs. Sanchez replaced fine wines and imported teas with cereal and snacks. Even the usually quiet gardener now had two small shadows, constantly asking about every plant and tree. Mr. Sanders, Mason peeked into James's office while he was typing. Can we visit Mom today? James checked his watch. After lunch. How's our room? Andrew asked eagerly. It's great. Mason grinned. Andrew found a chessboard in the closet. Do you know how to play? James paused. I used to. Can you teach us sometime? Mason asked, face glowing with hope. James couldn't say no to that expression. Maybe, he replied, returning to his work. Mason stood in the doorway for a second longer before quietly walking away, leaving James unexpectedly affected by the simple request. At the hospital, Emily's recovery was clear. Her cheeks had regained color, and she now sat up, hugging her children as they clung to her. The doctors say I'm responding well to treatment, she told James while the twins joyfully explored the small room. I don't know how I'll ever repay you. Don't, James said quietly. What matters is you're getting better. While the twins chatted with a cheerful nurse, Emily studied James quietly. You don't have children, do you? She asked gently. James stiffened slightly. Not anymore, he replied. After a pause, he added, I did once. Emily's eyes widened slightly, sensing the deeper pain behind his words. But before she could ask more, Andrew called out to her, and the moment passed. That night, the mansion's silence was broken by the sound of shattered glass. James and Mrs. Sanchez rushed to the living room where they found Mason frozen in place, staring at a broken antique vase on the floor. I'm sorry, Mason stammered, fear in his voice. I didn't mean to break it. I was just looking. James looked at the shards. Once a rare piece he'd purchased at a prestigious auction, now shattered. Are you hurt? He asked calmly. Mason shook his head, clearly bracing for punishment. Good, James replied. Mrs. Sanchez, would you mind cleaning this up? He turned and walked back to the dining room, leaving Mason stunned. You're not mad? The boy asked, hesitating as he followed. James stopped. It's just a thing, he said. Things can be replaced. That night, James couldn't sleep. As he walked the halls, he passed the twins' room and heard soft sobbing. He hesitated, then gently opened the door. Andrew sat on the bed, crying. Mason was fast asleep beside him. Why are you crying? James asked quietly. I miss Mom, Andrew whispered. What if she doesn't get better? James sat on the edge of the bed, his voice calm. The doctors are doing everything they can. She's getting stronger. Andrew looked up, fear on his face. Our dad died when we were 5, he said. Mom told us sometimes people don't come back. The simple truth struck James harder than he expected. Without thinking, he reached out and gently tapped Andrew's shoulder. She'll come back, he said with certainty. Try to sleep. As he left the room, James felt something shift inside. A change he couldn't explain. It was like a small crack in the walls he'd built around his heart. A crack that let in sadness and something softer he hadn't felt in a long time. 2 weeks after the twins arrived, the mansion seemed completely transformed. School books were scattered across the dining table. James had initiated temporary homeschooling. Tiny jackets now hung beside designer coats in the foyer. The once quiet house was alive with laughter, footsteps, and conversation. And now, the day they had been waiting for finally arrived. Emily was coming home to continue her treatment from there. James's driver picked her up from the hospital while the twins eagerly waited by the front door. "Mom," they shouted in unison, running as the car approached. Emily stepped out slowly, still weak, but her face now glowed with a returning light. She opened her arms, and the boys embraced her in an emotional hug. From the doorway, James watched silently, a feeling rising in his chest. Emily looked up, meeting his gaze. She smiled, genuine, warm. Something stirred in James's chest. "Welcome home," he said simply as they approached. "It's so much," Emily said, marveling at the size of the house. "We don't want to be a burden." "You're not," James interrupted, firm. "The doctor said you need rest and continuous treatment. This is where you'll get that." Mrs. Sanchez arrived to help Emily to her room, but the twins quickly offered to give her the tour instead, eager to show her every corner of their new world. That evening was the first time all 4 of them sat together at the dinner table. The twins filled the air with stories about the garden, Jimmy's unexpected chess lessons, and their fascination with his telescope. "You've been teaching chess?" Emily asked with a smile. James nodded slightly, almost sheepishly. They asked. "He's really good, Mom," Andrew chimed in. "He said we learn fast because we have special reasoning." James added, "They're quick learners." Emily's smile widened. "They always have been." But then her expression grew serious. "We need to talk about what's next. The doctor says I need long-term treatment, and I need to find a job that works with that." "One step at a time," James said, calm and steady. "Your appointments are scheduled. We'll sort the rest later." After dinner, with the twins asleep, James found Emily in the library. She stood before a shelf of photographs, pictures of James' parents and business milestones, carefully chosen memories. But the empty spaces between the frames spoke just as loudly. Gaps that suggested something missing. "Thank you," Emily said softly, eyes still on the shelf. "Not just for the hospital, but for giving my boys a place where they feel safe. That's rare for them." James stood in the doorway, silent. "They're incredible kids," he replied. "They mentioned a room that's always locked," Emily said gently, turning to him. "They thought it was full of treasure." James's body tensed slightly. "It's just storage," he said quickly, unconvincing. Emily looked at him calmly, kindly. "I understand the need to keep parts of ourselves private," she said. "We all have pieces we want to keep locked away." There was no judgment in her voice, only quiet understanding. It hit James deeper than he expected. For years, people treated his past like shattered glass. But Emily's simple acceptance felt like a gentle touch to an old wound. "James," she said softly. "Call me Jimmy," he replied. She nodded. "All right, Jimmy." Silence settled between them, heavy with the words neither of them was ready to speak. "I should get some rest," Emily said after a moment. "It's late, Jimmy." "Good night," he said. After she left, Jimmy poured himself a drink and sat alone, wondering how these strangers had become so much a part of his life, and how quickly they had turned his world upside down. What scared him most was how much he already loved them, and how terrified he was of losing them. He quickly slipped his hand into his pocket and pulled out the red toy car. Under the lamplight, he traced its scratched paint with his thumb. It was incredible how something so small had cracked open the hardened world he had built. He sat in his office. Quarterly reports were stacked in front of him, untouched. Outside the tall windows, he could hear the twins' laughter as they played soccer on the lawn. The sound, once unimaginable in this house, now filled the air. 3 weeks had passed since Emily came home. Her strength was returning, and what was supposed to be temporary now felt like it had no clear end. Jimmy didn't know how to feel about that. His phone buzzed. A message from his executive assistant. Board meeting tomorrow at 9 a.m. confirmed attendance. He stared at it, then replied, confirmed, and set the phone aside. No hesitation. The office door opened. Mr. Jimmy, Andrew said, peeking in. Mom said lunch is ready. Whenever Emily was strong enough, she insisted on cooking herself. She said it was her way of contributing, even though Jimmy constantly discouraged her from overexerting. Over time, her simple meals became a kind of ritual, an excuse to gather everyone around the table. I'll be right there, Jimmy said. Andrew stepped inside, hesitating. Can I ask you something? Jimmy nodded, inviting him in. Why do you always carry that little car? The boy asked, pointing to Jimmy's pocket. The one we sold you? Jimmy instinctively touched the outline of the toy in his pocket. I'm not sure, he answered honestly. Andrew stepped closer. It used to belong to Dad, he said. He gave it to us before he died. A flash of guilt struck Jimmy. I didn't know, he said. I should give it back. Andrew shook his head. No, it's yours. We sold it. Mom says when you make a deal, you keep it. Silence. Andrew looked at him, a strange depth in his eyes. Did you have a kid? He asked. Is that why that room is always closed? The question hit like a punch. In business, no one ever dared bring up Jimmy's past, especially not this deeply. But Andrew didn't know better. His honesty was sharp and unfiltered. I did, Jimmy said slowly. A son. What happened? Jimmy could have dodged the question. Could have hid behind the walls he'd built. But this time he chose another path. There was a car accident, he said. With my wife. They didn't survive. Andrew stayed quiet. Then he said something that seemed far beyond his years. That's why you helped us, because we remind you of him. Jimmy looked into the distance, unsure how to respond. Maybe, he said. Mom says people cross paths for a reason, Andrew added. Maybe we came into your life to help you, too. Before Jimmy could say anything, Mason appeared at the door. Come on, it's spaghetti night. Andrew smiled and followed his brother. At the door, he turned and said, You should eat with us, Mr. Jimmy. It's more fun when we're all together. That night, laughter returned to the dining room. The twins animatedly recounted their soccer game. Their faces glowed with excitement. Emily watched them proudly. Jimmy was quiet, just observing, and for the first time in a very long time, he felt something he had almost forgotten. Peace. Jimmy sat quietly, watching the scene before him. The once formal dining room, once reserved for business dinners and serious meetings, was now filled with warmth, stories, and genuine connection. He hardly recognized it. The twins said you have a board meeting tomorrow, Emily said as they cleared the table, despite Mrs. Sanchez being there and fully capable of doing everything. Yes, Jimmy replied. But I'll be back before evening. Emily nodded. We'll be fine. It's good you're returning to your usual routine. But as Jimmy looked around the table at the laughter, the shared meal, the completeness of it all, something shifted inside him. This didn't feel like a temporary break from his normal life. This felt like what normal should be, and that realization left him deeply unsettled. The next day, the board meeting felt endless. Jimmy kept glancing at his watch, his thoughts drifting back to the mansion and the people waiting there. When the CFO asked about the quarterly forecast, he had to ask him to repeat the question, something that had never happened before. You okay, Jimmy? The CO asked during a break, concern in his voice. I'm fine, he answered briefly. Let's finish this. When he got home, the sun had already set, and the house was unusually quiet. He followed soft voices to the twins' room and found Emily sitting by Zach's bedside, worry on her face. What happened? Jimmy asked quickly, noticing the redness in the boy's cheeks. He's running a fever, Emily explained. It came on fast this afternoon. Zach looked at him weakly. Hi, Mr. Jimmy. Andrew sat across the room, watching his brother closely. He's thrown up twice, he reported seriously. Jimmy approached silently, observing Zach's shallow breaths and glassy eyes. He immediately pulled out his phone and called his personal doctor. He'll be here in 20 minutes, he announced after the call. Emily looked surprised. A house call? That's not necessary. It is, Jimmy said firmly. We don't know if it's related to your condition or if it's contagious. Better to be safe. The doctor arrived as promised. After an examination, he confirmed it was just a common virus. No serious danger. Rest, fluids, and time were all Zach needed. But even with that reassurance, Jimmy couldn't relax. He kept checking on the boy throughout the night. On one of his visits, he found Emily asleep in the chair, her hands still resting on Zach's forehead. Her face showed deep fatigue. Quietly, Jimmy draped a blanket over her shoulders and stood beside them, watching the peaceful scene. And in his chest, he felt a gentle ache, a feeling he couldn't quite name. By morning, Zach's fever had gone down. Jimmy canceled all his appointments and worked from home, keeping an eye on the boy. That afternoon, Zach was sitting up, sipping ginger tea while Andrew told an overly dramatic story to make him laugh. You don't have to stay, Emily said when she saw Jimmy in the library. We can take care of ourselves. I just want to make sure he's okay, Jimmy replied, eyes still on his laptop. Emily watched him quietly. You love them, she said. Not a question, but a statement. Jimmy hesitated. Me? Yes, they call you Mr. Jimmy now, not Mr. Sanders, Emily added. That means they trust you. They're used to you. And you? You're afraid they're getting too used to you? Jimmy asked in return, his tone low but telling. Emily sighed and sat across from him. We can't stay here forever, Jimmy. Eventually, I'll be well enough to work. We'll need to find our own place. I have to give them stability, something that doesn't rely on someone else's kindness. She paused. The doctor says I'm responding better than expected. I might be able to reduce my sessions to once a month. I've already started looking at apartments within our budget. A coldness crept into Jimmy's chest. There's no rush, he said quietly. There is, Emily replied gently. The longer we stay, the harder it'll be for all of us to leave. He had no answer. In business, he never hesitated. But this wasn't business. This was life. Emotional, messy, and unplanned. The very things he'd long tried to avoid. You've already done so much for us, Emily said as she walked to the door. But we can't rely on you forever. She stopped. What if I asked you to stay? Jimmy said suddenly. Emily turned, surprised. Her expression was a mix of shock, caution, and warmth. Why would you want that? She asked softly. Jimmy had no answer. Not yet. No words to explain the way he felt. That night, Jimmy once again stood in front of the closed room. The key trembled slightly in his hand. It had been 5 years since he last opened that door. Inside was Carlos's room, his son's. A space perfectly preserved, untouched since the day of the accident. Emily's question echoed in his mind like a whisper he couldn't ignore. What if I asked you to stay? A question that had slipped out unintentionally, but revealed more than he was ready to admit. He took a deep breath and slid the key into the old lock. A soft click echoed down the hallway. A quiet sound that boomed like thunder in the silence. He opened the door slowly. Light from the hallway caught the dust in the air, making it dance like memories returning to life. Nothing had changed. The blue walls still bore solar system decals. The bookshelf was still lined with adventure novels. On the bed, the spaceship-themed comforter remained rumpled exactly as it had been when Carlos last used it. Per Jimmy's instruction, Mrs. Sanchez had never touched the room. On the nightstand sat a framed photo, Jimmy, Carlos, and Sarah on a beach, taken during their last vacation together. Jimmy stepped inside and picked up one of the small toy cars from the shelf. It looked just like the one Mason and Andrew had sold him. Carlos had loved toy cars, too. Mr. Jimmy, he turned quickly. Andrew stood in the doorway, eyes wide, clearly unsure if he was allowed to be there. You shouldn't be in here, Jimmy said, his voice rough. Sorry, Andrew whispered. I just heard the door open and got curious. He glanced around the room, slowly taking it in, the realization dawning. This was your son's room, he said softly. Jimmy nodded, unable to speak. What was his name? Carlos, Jimmy answered quietly. He was our age, Andrew said. Wasn't he? He would have been, Jimmy replied. He was 5 when he trailed off. Andrew stepped closer and stopped in front of the photo on the nightstand. You look happy there, he said. Really happy. We were, Jimmy replied. Andrew looked at the photo for a moment, then smiled gently. My mom says our dad's watching over us from heaven. Maybe Carlos is watching over you, too. That simple belief hit Jimmy harder than he expected. He sat heavily on the edge of the bed, overwhelmed by memories and grief. I miss him, he whispered. Every day. We miss our dad, too, Andrew said, sitting beside him. Mom says it's okay to be sad sometimes, but it's more important to let yourself be happy again, too. In the hallway, a quiet breath was heard. Mason stood, pale, with Emily behind him, silently observing the scene. Boys, let's give him some space, she said gently. It's okay, Jimmy replied, surprising even himself. They can stay. Mason entered the room slowly, eyes scanning everything with reverence. Your nightlight is awesome, he said, pointing at the rocket-shaped lamp. Carlos was afraid of the dark, Jimmy explained. We gave him that on his 5th birthday. Emily stayed at the door while Jimmy showed the twins Carlos's favorite books, toys, and the stories behind them. Each memory surfaced like water from a long-sealed dam. The pain didn't vanish, but sharing it brought a strange sense of comfort. That night, after the twins had fallen asleep, Emily found Jimmy still sitting in the room. Sorry they came in, she said. They're naturally curious. Don't apologize, Jimmy said, his voice steady. It was time. She leaned against the wall. It's a beautiful room. I'm sure Carlos was a wonderful boy. He was, Jimmy said. He looked at her, pain in his eyes. The accident. It was my fault. I was driving. A truck ran a red light. I survived. They didn't. Emily moved closer and sat beside him. And you've been punishing yourself ever since, she said softly. The truth landed quietly but heavily between them. The guilt of surviving can be a heavy burden, she added. But living in pain isn't how you honor their memory. You don't have to carry it forever. Jimmy looked into her eyes, and for the first time in many years, he felt seen. Not as a CEO, not as a wealthy man, but as someone broken, slowly beginning to heal. I don't know how to stop, he admitted. Emily gently took his hand. Maybe you already have. Spring arrived, bringing change with it. The entire estate came alive again. The once quiet gardens became Mason and Andrew's favorite playground. They built forts, explored hidden corners of the property, and occasionally helped the gardener. Emily's strength returned gradually. Her once pale face now glowed with warmth and vitality. But the biggest transformation was in Jimmy. One by one, the walls he had built began to crumble. Emily noticed how his shoulders relaxed when the boys entered a room, how his laughter became genuine at their stories. The silence that once haunted the house had been replaced with the sounds of love. One Saturday morning, Jimmy walked into the kitchen and, much to everyone's surprise, announced, "No work today." "What?" Mason nearly dropped his spoon. "Seriously, I was thinking we could visit the Natural History Museum," Jimmy said. "The new dinosaur exhibit just opened." It was as if this kind of spontaneous family outing was a regular thing in his life. "Unless you'd rather go somewhere else." "Dinosaurs are perfect," Andrew replied, practically bouncing in his seat. Emily watched them, a quiet awe in her gaze. "Are you sure, Jimmy?" she asked. "You usually work Saturdays." Their eyes met. No more words were needed. "Work can wait," Jimmy said calmly, and they both knew how heavy those words truly were for a man who had built his world around work. The museum trip felt like a turning point. It was their first outing together, not related to hospitals, just a simple day out as a group, as something more. People took notice, especially museum staff who recognized Jimmy Sanders, the famously private CEO, now walking around with a woman and two identical boys. But Jimmy, who had once cared so much about appearances, didn't seem to mind anymore. "Mr. Jimmy, look!" Mason shouted, pointing at the massive T-Rex skeleton. "It's even bigger than the one in your library." Jimmy smiled, swept up in the boy's excitement. He found himself happily answering questions, his knowledge surprisingly fresh, pulled from the stories he used to read to Carlos at bedtime. When Andrew grabbed his hand to drag him to the next exhibit, Jimmy didn't pull away. The contact felt natural, familiar, like it belonged. From a nearby bench, Emily watched them. Something stirred in her chest, a realization. Jimmy wasn't just helping anymore. He had become something more. Someone who truly cared. Someone who had chosen to heal and be part of something real again. And what unsettled her most wasn't the gratitude she felt. It was how much she loved him, too. "Want some ice cream?" Jimmy asked as they exited the museum and spotted a vendor across the street. The twins didn't need to be asked twice. They ran ahead, shouting out their favorite flavors as they went. Jimmy and Emily walked slowly behind. "Thank you," she said quietly. "Today meant a lot. I haven't seen them this happy in a long time." "I had fun, too," Jimmy replied, glancing at her. "More than I expected." "You're great with them," Emily said. "Patient. That's rare in men." Jimmy watched the twins argue over toppings at the ice cream stand. "They make it easy," he said. "They're good kids." "You didn't just give them a house," Emily added softly. "You gave them stability, safety, someone they can count on." Jimmy turned to her, his gaze steady. "About what you said last week about finding your own place." "Jimmy," she started, but he cut her off gently. "I don't want you to go," he said. "Not because I feel sorry for you, but because I want you to stay." His words hung in the air, quiet, but filled with meaning. Neither of them was quite ready to unpack. Before Emily could respond, the twins came running back. "Mr. Jimmy, can we go to the park next weekend?" Andrew shouted, eyes shining. "Maybe," Jimmy said, glancing at Emily with a slight smile. "We'll see." That evening, as the twins excitedly recounted everything they'd seen at the museum to Mrs. Sanchez, Jimmy found Emily standing in Carlos's room, looking up at the model airplane hanging from the ceiling. "I used to think we should leave," she said without turning around. "Cut things off before the connection became too strong, but now I don't know if I can." Jimmy stepped into the room behind her. What was once a space full of pain and memories now held something new. Hope. "Then don't," he said, his voice firm. The next morning, sunlight filled the kitchen as Emily flipped pancakes. Her energy had returned. She looked healthy, vibrant. The scent of fresh coffee and breakfast filled the house. A domestic calm Jimmy had never thought possible. "Need help?" he asked, entering in casual clothes, no suit in sight. "Set the table," she replied with a smile. "The boys should be down any minute." They worked in companionable silence. When their hands brushed, reaching for plates, neither pulled away. It felt natural, a quiet acknowledgement of how far they had come. Dr. Levine said I can reduce my treatments to once a week, Emily said as she stirred the batter. My kidneys are doing better than expected. That's great news, Jimmy replied, pausing from setting silverware. It is, she said, though her voice held hesitation. But it also means I need to think about work again. I can't rely on you forever. Before he could respond, footsteps thundered down the stairs. Mom, Mr. Jimmy, Mason yelled. He was already dressed in a baseball uniform. Coach said I'm pitching today. And I'm playing first base, Andrew added excitedly. As plates filled with food and chatter turned to team positions and game day excitement, the house, once cold and silent, now breathed with life, movement, and the rhythm of a real family. A real family. The old tension was gone, even if just for a moment. Jimmy, who once attended sports events only as networking opportunities, now found himself genuinely invested in how the twins performed on the field. At the local park, Jimmy and Emily sat side by side on the cold metal bleachers, watching the boys warm up with their team. A few parents nodded politely at Jimmy, but none approached. His reputation for privacy still created distance. They've grown so much, Emily said. They don't even fit the clothes they wore in February, Jimmy replied with a faint smile. Kids have a way of growing when you're not looking. Emily turned to study his profile. Not just physically, she said. They're more confident now, more secure because of you. Jimmy shook his head. They're strong on their own. And they have you. She met his eyes. But now they have you, too. You're who they talk about most now. Mr. Jimmy showed us the telescope. Mr. Jimmy explained how planes fly. Mr. Jimmy promised to teach us how to win at chess. Jimmy's gaze followed Mason as he took his place on the pitcher's mound. The boy's face was focused, serious. I never thought this would happen, Jimmy whispered. All of this? Neither did I, Emily replied. That first day, I thought you were just another rich man trying to ease your guilt by helping. Their eyes met again, this time deeper. But I was wrong, she added. Suddenly, the crowd erupted in applause. Mason had struck out the batter. Jimmy stood and clapped louder than he had at any corporate gala. That night, after the twins had gone to bed, Jimmy and Emily sat together on the terrace. The soft spring breeze carried the scent of newly blooming flowers. Between them sat a stack of real estate listings Emily had been quietly reviewing. These are pretty far from your doctor's, Jimmy said, scanning one of the sheets. They're all I can afford, Emily replied calmly. I've also applied to a few jobs, places that can work with my treatment schedule. Jimmy set the papers down. There's another option. Jimmy, she started, but he cut her off gently. This house has 7 bedrooms. The boys love their school. Your doctors are nearby. Everything you need is here. He paused. Stay. Not just temporarily. For good. Emily turned away, her face lit softly by the moon. People will talk, she said quietly. They'll say I took advantage of your kindness, that I used you. Let them, Jimmy said firmly. I've lived long enough making decisions based on what others think. That's over. What exactly are you saying? Emily asked, barely above a whisper. Jimmy reached for her hand. I'm saying we stop pretending this is temporary. Whatever this is, let's give it a real chance. He gently squeezed her hand. I'm not asking for your answer right now. Just don't leave. A shimmer welled in Emily's eyes. I'm scared, she admitted. Not of you. Of hope. Of letting the boys hope. Of giving them something that might not last. I'm scared, too, Jimmy said. But for the first time in a long time, I'm more afraid of losing this than I am of keeping it. And in the quiet of the night, their hands remained joined. A silent promise that they would face the future together. Summer arrived, bringing light and vitality. The sprawling gardens became Mason and Andrew's favorite playground. They built forts, explored the estate's corners, and sometimes helped the gardener. The house changed, too. Children's drawings covered the refrigerator. little shoes cluttered the entryway. And laughter replaced the mansion's once solemn silence. 3 months had passed since Jimmy asked Emily to stay. She hadn't said yes, but she hadn't left either. Instead, a routine had formed, one that began to feel like a real family. "Mom, Mr. Jimmy, come look," Andrew shouted one Saturday morning, bursting into the breakfast room where Jimmy and Emily were having coffee. He was covered in mud, beaming, and holding a small turtle. Mason stood behind him, equally muddy and equally thrilled. "We found him near the pond," Mason said excitedly. "Can we keep him?" Jimmy glanced at Emily, who raised an eyebrow. They had learned to communicate without speaking, another sign of how deep their bond had grown. "Turtles need special care," Jimmy said seriously. "We should find out what he needs first." "We can build him a house," Andrew offered. "Don't you have stuff in the garage, Mr. Jimmy?" "I do," Jimmy replied, surprised at how naturally the boys were now included in everything he owned. Emily smiled, watching them. "First, wash up, then we'll research together how to take care of a turtle." The twins dashed away, leaving muddy footprints in their wake. Once, messes like that would have annoyed Jimmy. Now he barely noticed. "You know what this means?" Emily teased. "We're building a turtle resort this afternoon." Jimmy chuckled. "I manage a multi-billion-dollar company. I think I can handle designing a turtle dream home." Their laughter flowed easily, something that happened more and more lately. The rest of the day passed in quiet harmony. They looked up care tips online, gathered materials, and worked together in the garden. Jimmy, who once delegated every task, now knelt in the dirt, explaining drainage techniques to the twins. Mrs. Sanchez brought out a tray of lemonade and paused, watching the scene, the once reclusive CEO smiling and caked in mud, helping two boys build a turtle shelter. She exchanged a knowing glance with Emily, both silently recognizing how far he had come. That evening, after the boys were tucked in, a routine Jimmy now performed with quiet devotion, he and Emily sat in the library with glasses of wine. "The turtle house turned out pretty well," Emily said, curled into a corner of the sofa. "Maybe you missed your calling as a habitat engineer." Jimmy laughed, more relaxed than he had ever seemed in the early days. "The board would be shocked if they saw me covered in dirt," he joked. "They've been pretty understanding about your schedule shifts," Emily noted. "One perk of being the founder," he replied. "But my team's solid. They've held everything down while I've been away." They sat quietly for a moment. The soft ticking of the antique clock and the subtle hum of the house the only sounds. "I got a job offer today," Emily said finally. "A director role at a nonprofit. It doesn't pay much, but they're flexible with my treatment schedule." Jimmy set down his glass slowly. "That's great news. When do you start?" "I haven't said yes yet," she admitted, watching him carefully. "If I take it, I'll have to make decisions about other things." The air grew heavier with everything unspoken. Was she planning to leave? Had this all been temporary? "Jimmy," she said softly. "We've been floating in this in-between space for a while now. The boys feel at home here. And you? They see you as part of that home." "Family," Jimmy said, his voice thick with emotion. She nodded. "They've grown attached to you, and so have I." Jimmy stepped closer and took her hand. "And you?" "I've learned to love the man behind the walls," Emily said. "The one who builds turtle homes, cheers at baseball games, and opens doors I thought would stay shut forever." Jimmy gently traced his thumb over her palm. "I didn't think I'd feel this again," he whispered. "After Sarah and Carlos, I thought love was too dangerous, too painful." "And now?" Emily asked. "Now," Jimmy said, "I'm scared. Because for the first time in years, I have something I don't want to lose." Emily leaned in until their foreheads touched. "Then ask us to stay," she whispered. "Not as guests. Not out of pity. Ask us for real." The next day, Jimmy sat at his desk, staring at a small velvet box. Inside was an antique ring passed down from his grandmother, something he'd kept in a safety deposit box for years. After their conversation the night before, he had retrieved it. Emily's words echoing in his mind. Then ask us for real. It was thrilling and terrifying. Jimmy Sanders, always decisive in business, now felt frozen. A soft knot broke his thoughts. Mr. Jimmy, Andrew peeked through the door. Mom said lunch is ready. I'll be right there, Jimmy replied quickly, slipping the box into a drawer. Andrew lingered. You okay? You look nervous. Jimmy smiled faintly. Just thinking about something important. Is it about whether we're staying? Andrew asked bluntly. Because we want to forever. Jimmy blinked, caught off guard. You do? Andrew nodded. Mom smiles more here. And you're happier when we're all together. We see it. You're a smart kid, Jimmy said softly, clearly moved. Andrew shrugged. Mason notices more stuff than I do, but I notice the important things. He paused, then added, Mom loves you. Her smile's different when you're around. Before Jimmy could respond, Andrew darted off. At lunch, Jimmy sat quietly, watching Emily laugh at something Mason said. When she glanced at him, he saw that smile Andrew mentioned, the one that warmed him more than he expected. Hey, Jimmy said as they cleared the table. Would you like to go down to the lake this afternoon? It's a beautiful day. The twins cheered. The estate's private lake, complete with a dock and boathouse, had become one of their favorite spots during the summer. A few hours later, as the sun dipped lower in the sky, Jimmy and Emily sat on the dock, watching the boys splash and laugh in the shallows. Their laughter echoed across the water, full of life. I talked to the nonprofit this morning, Emily said. Asked for a few more days to decide. Jimmy nodded, his hand brushing against the ring box in his pocket. What's holding you back? He asked. You know, she said, looking at him. Same thing that's got you fidgeting right now. There was a softness in her gaze. Whatever you're thinking, say it. Jimmy took a slow breath. When I bought that toy car from the boys, I didn't think it would change anything, he said. I was hollow, just moving through life, not really living. He glanced at the boys on the shore, then back at her. Then suddenly, the house filled with sound again, with life, with love. This isn't charity, is it? Emily asked gently. Jimmy shook his head. I thought it was at first, but they reminded me how to love again. They reminded me of Carlos, but also of everything I'd shut away. Emily reached for his hand. And now I can't imagine this house without you, without your laughter in the kitchen, without their footsteps in the halls, without the family we've built. He took out the box and opened it, revealing the emerald ring surrounded by diamonds. I'm not offering money or comfort, he said, voice firm but full of feeling. I'm offering a life, a real life, one that honors the past but isn't trapped by it. He took her hand gently. Emily Miller, will you and your amazing boys make this house your home forever? Will you marry me? Tears filled Emily's eyes. Seconds passed, long and quiet, before she finally nodded. Yes, she whispered. Yes, we'll stay. Yes, I'll marry you. Jimmy's hands trembled as he slipped the ring onto her finger. Then he pulled her into a tight embrace. Their kiss began soft, full of tenderness, then deepened, an unspoken promise to heal together and face the future as one. Suddenly, a loud splash and laughter broke the moment. The twins came running back, soaked and wide-eyed. What's going on? Mason asked, noticing his mom's tears and Jimmy's expression. Emily held up her hand, the ring catching the last rays of sun. Mr. Jimmy just asked us to stay, she said warmly. Forever as a family. The boys stared at the ring, then at the two adults. Wait, does that mean you're getting married? Andrew asked carefully. Jimmy nodded. If that's all right with you. The twins exchanged one of their silent glances, then grinned wide. Can we call you Dad now? Mason asked boldly. Jimmy was taken aback, expecting hesitation. Not this. I'd be honored, he said, voice thick with emotion. But only when you're ready. The boys leapt into their arms, nearly knocking them into the water. Laughter and tears mingled in the golden light of the setting sun. That night, after the boys had fallen asleep, Emily sat on the porch, looking at her ring under the moonlight. Jimmy stood beside her, thinking of Carlos for the first time without pain. Instead, he felt a sweet ache filled with gratitude. He knew Carlos would be happy for him, for all of them. In his pocket, he still carried the red toy car, not as a reminder of sorrow, but as a symbol of new beginnings. 6 months later, Jimmy Sanders, once known as the brilliant but distant businessman, attended a charity gala in Boston, accompanied by Emily and the twins. Their engagement had become the talk of the city. As they entered the venue, they were greeted by Daniel Armstrong, the board chairman. "We thought you'd gone full family man," Daniel teased, watching Jimmy gently guide Emily with a hand on her back. "Daniel, I'd like you to meet my fiancée, Emily Miller." Emily looked radiant in a deep blue dress, the emerald ring catching the light as she offered her hand. "It's a pleasure, Mr. Armstrong. Jimmy's told me great things about you." Daniel, slightly caught off guard, quickly recovered. "The pleasure's mine. You've changed, Jimmy. Happier now. I see why." As the evening went on, Jimmy introduced Emily to colleagues and acquaintances. Some welcomed her warmly, others, more curious, quietly observed the woman who had captured the city's most admired widower. "They're studying me," Emily whispered as they danced. "The single mom who stole the billionaire's heart." Jimmy pulled her closer, letting the orchestra's music guide them. "Let them wonder," he said. "We know the truth." "And what's that?" she asked, smiling. "That I'm the lucky one," he replied, voice gentle. "You gave me a second chance at happiness I thought I'd never have." On the way home, Emily leaned her head on Jimmy's shoulder in the car. "The boys are probably demanding details," she said, referring to Mason and Andrew. "Especially Mason. He's expecting gold plates." Jimmy laughed. "Wait until they hear about the chocolate fountain." Back at the mansion, they found Mrs. Sanchez reading a book to the twins, who refused to sleep until their mom and Jimmy returned. "Mom, Dad," Mason cried out. The word Dad now came naturally, part of their lives. Every time he heard it, Jimmy felt a warmth that nearly overwhelmed him. "How was the fancy party?" Andrew asked as Emily kicked off her shoes. "To be honest, more boring than you'd expect," Jimmy replied, loosening his tie. "A lot of grown-ups talking about work." "Did you dance?" Mason asked as he made space on the couch. "We did," Emily said, settling in. "And guess what? Your future dad can actually dance." The boys lit up. "Can you teach us?" Andrew asked eagerly. "So we're ready when we go to fancy parties." "Of course," Jimmy said, smiling. "Though that won't be for a while." Mrs. Sanchez quietly exited, a smile on her face. It was a picture of a true home, far from the cold, quiet nights that once cloaked the house. "I got an A on my science project," Mason blurted. "I got picked for the school play," Andrew added. "Mrs. Peterson said my ecosystem model was the best she's seen," Mason continued, not to be outdone. Emily and Jimmy shared a look, pride and joy radiating between them. These little triumphs, these moments of ordinary life, had become the heartbeat of their new reality. That night, they found themselves standing in Carlos's old room, now a space filled with remembrance and meaning. The past and the present gently woven together. Jimmy had once considered converting it into a room for the twins, but Emily had gently declined. "He's part of our story," she said. "We're not erasing the past, we're growing from it." As their wedding day approached, Jimmy grew more aware of the quiet wisdom Emily carried. The room was no longer a shrine to sorrow. It was a bridge, just like him. 3 weeks, Emily whispered, leaning on his shoulder. "Do you regret anything?" "Only letting the boys carry the rings," Jimmy joked. "I keep imagining them racing down the aisle." Emily laughed. "Mrs. Sanchez threatened no dessert for a month if they misbehave. Now that's real motivation." As they turned out the light, Jimmy said, "Even if it turns into a circus, as long as you're my wife and we're a family, that's enough." Emily kissed him gently. We already are a family. The wedding's just a formality. The garden was in full bloom on the day of the ceremony. Sunlight streamed down. Fragrant air danced around the smiling guests. Exactly 1 year after Jimmy's lakeside proposal, they weren't having a traditional wedding, but a vow renewal, more personal, more profound. Under a flower-covered arch, Emily stood in a lace dress, facing Jimmy, eyes full of emotion. Between them, Mason and Andrew stood tall, each holding a velvet pillow with a ring on top. Their faces glowed with pride. 1 year ago, the officiant began, this family of 4 was born. Today, they celebrate that journey and renew the love that brought them here. Jimmy looked at Emily, still amazed she was here, still amazed she loved him. When I first met 2 brave boys selling a toy car, Jimmy began, I never imagined they would bring life back into mine. You and they healed wounds I thought would never close. Emily gripped his hands tighter. You saved us, she said, in every way a person can save a family, but more than that, you loved us fully by choice. The twins passed them the rings as if in a sacred exchange. As Jimmy slid the band onto Emily's finger, he saw the engraving inside. Second chances. It was the full circle. From a red toy car to an entirely new life, proof that even the most broken hearts could find joy again. In the most unexpected doors, love opened. The end.